autorità, magnifici rettori, signor Presidente e signori consiglieri di amministrazione, illustri professori, cari studenti, gentili signore e signori, cominciamo con una storia. That's the extent of my Italian. More than 800 years ago, a Norman knight named Guillaume de Crisp moved to a village not far from Oxford in England. In 1921, his 16th great-granddaughter, his 16th great-granddaughter was born less than 20 kilometers away to a family that had been called Cripps for more than 300 years by then. In the 1950s, she found a job in London in an organization that was working for racial harmony, and that was how she met a student from the British colony of the Gold Coast. He was an anti-colonial activist, the president of the West African Students' Union, and a representative in Britain of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who was to lead the Gold Coast to independence as Ghana in 1957. They married, and I was their first child. My father's family came from Asante, a region in the heart of the modern Republic of Ghana, and his lineage could be traced back to an 18th century general, a successful member of the military aristocracy that created the Asante Empire, and his name, Akramampim, is one of the many names my parents gave me. My book, The Lies That Bind, this is historical Asante. My book, The Lies That Bind, Rethinking Identity, is full of family stories like these, because I wanted to explore the ways in which narratives shape our sense of who we are. Each person's sense of self is bound to be shaped by his or her background, but 6 of the chapters of my book are focused on widely shared identities: gender, creed or religion, country, color, class, and culture. Why do these things matter, and what on earth do they have in common? Well, here are 3 ways in which these very disparate forms of grouping people do have some important things in common. First of all, identities come with labels and ideas about why and to whom they should be applied. Second, your identity shapes your thoughts about how you should behave. And third, it affects the way other people treat you. And finally, all these dimensions of identity are regularly disputed: who's in the group, what they're like, and how they should behave and be treated. As for why identity matters, well, the short answer is that social identities with these properties are very important in making our communities and our lives. We make our lives as men and as women, as Italians and as Americans, as Catholics and as Protestants. But too often in the modern world, identities matter not just because they bring people together, but because they tear us apart. Another family story. My father was elected to our first parliament in the late 1950s in Ghana, and my grandfather had been, in effect, the prime minister of the Asante king. This is the Asante king of my childhood. And like his father, like my grandfather, my dad had a strong sense of identity as an Asante. But one of the great themes of my father's life as a politician over the next 30 years was the importance of resisting what he called tribalism. In Ghanaian English, we call our many ethnic groups tribes, and most Ghanaians will eagerly tell you their tribe. Ghana has 23 languages that are spoken by more than 50,000 people, and there are 80 or more languages altogether, some spoken by more than one so-called tribe. So, depending on how you count, we have at least 100 tribes. Now, one thing you could mean by the word tribalism is taking too seriously these older political identities, older that is than Ghana, and not giving proper weight to the modern national identity as a result. My father thought that when you were acting as a national politician in the Ghanaian parliament, for example, you shouldn't seek unfair advantage for your tribe over the others, and you should never fail to give full weight to the proper weight to the concerns of tribes other than your own. This was an ideal that our politics in Ghana has never fully lived up to. Everybody has always been aware of the tribal origins of our political leaders, and everyone supposes that there can be undeserved advantages in being a member of the president's ethnic group. But the ideal is important, nevertheless. Political cultures are defined by such ideals, even when we don't live up to them. The state is not meant to have a tribal identity. That's why the ideal that, sorry, what's going on here? Should I go backwards a bit? That's why the ideal, and that's the ideal that anti-tribalism stands for, the idea that the state does not have a tribal identity. Ghana is not meant to be a Santi in the sort of way that most of you here probably believe that Italy is not meant to be white. I grew up then knowing that tribalism was bad, that being a good Ghanaian, identifying with the country was good. We were Ghanaian patriots, but I also grew up thinking that I was a Santi and that the fate of Asante, embodied in my uncle and great-uncle, kings of Asante, was important for me, for my family, and for all other Asante people. We took pride in our heritage. We defeated the British a few times in warfare. We supported Asante Kotoko, our local soccer team, our local football team. And so it never occurred to me that rejecting tribalism meant rejecting my tribe. How then can we take advantage of our tribes without succumbing to the debilitating effects of tribalism? Well, my father's answer was that, like the citizens of every country, however divided we were by anything else, there was still one identity we shared, and that was our national identity, our identity as Ghanaians. And the theory of democracy is that we, the people of this nation, are charged with piloting the ship of state together. Democracy is not about majorities winning and minorities losing. It's about all of us taking responsibility for contributing to the nation's collective welfare. And as the great American philosopher John Rawls argued, we need to recognize that our fellow citizens, with their differing conceptions of the good life, must nevertheless treat each other as free and equal persons and offer terms of social cooperation that all of us can endorse. A democratic compact requires us to secure for everyone then, not just for my tribe, the rights enunciated in the Universal Declaration, things like freedom of speech and religion and assembly, and equal protection of the law regardless of race and sex. So we need to find places, both virtual and physical, where people of our dominant political tribes interact to produce the social trust, the social capital that allows tribes to live together in peace, while continuing, of course, to disagree about important matters. We need to be in conversation with one another across all our different identities within the nation. Right now, in my country, and I fear in yours, we need to find ways to draw on our non-political identities as citizens of particular communities, members of churches and synagogues and mosques, as well as people of diverse identities and other dimensions, to combat the tribalism that is undermining democracy around the world. We do not need to put aside our other identities, but we do need to tame the ways in which they stop us working together for the common good. That's true in international politics, as well as national politics, of course. For better or worse, it's only going to be through the mobilization of our identities that we can change the world. Over the course of my life, I have watched, learned from, and participated in the reshaping of what it means to be a woman or a man in the various interconnected places that I have lived my life. Without the reimagination of gender that has increasingly liberated all of us, I could not have lived my life as a gay man, married to another man, making a life in public and in private ways together. This life has been made possible through other people's struggle in ways both large and small, and by taking small risks over the years myself with friends and employers and family. So although identities can limit us, let's never forget how they can also be sources of liberation. Women have worked together across class and language and religion and nation in the global struggle against oppression and inequality. And social identities connect the small scale where we live our lives alongside our families and friends with larger movements, causes, and concerns. They make a wider world intelligible, alive, and urgent to us. They can expand our horizons to communities larger than the ones we locally inhabit. We live in an age in which our actions in the realm of ideology, as well as in the realm of technology and economy, increasingly have global effects. We are in desperate need then today of a cosmopolitan spirit. Cosmopolitanism was born, as you probably know, in the 4th century before Christ as an act of defiance when Diogenes the Cynic, who lived famously in a large terracotta pot, first claimed he was cosmopolites. This is a word he invented. The word translates more or less as citizen of the world. Diogenes was fond of challenging the common sense of his day, and this word was meant to have a paradox built into it. A polites was a free adult male citizen of a polis, one of the self-governing Greek towns in southeastern Europe and Asia Minor, including, of course, in this part of the world. And the cosmos was the whole of the universe. So it would have been obvious to any of Diogenes' contemporaries that you couldn't belong to the universe in the same way as you belong to a town such as Athens, which in his day had only 30,000 free male adult citizens. Nonetheless, this paradoxical formulation has come to enjoy extraordinary appeal around the planet. Conservative populism may be on the rise in Europe, but in a 2016 study conducted by the BBC, nearly 3/4 of the Chinese and Nigerians who were polled, along with more than half of the Brazilians, Canadians, and Ghanaians who were asked, said that they saw themselves more as a global citizen than a citizen of their own country. Even 2 in 5 Americans said that. I find that astonishing and delightful. Yet there is something misleading about this conception of identity. The BBC poll presupposes that one must weigh the relative importance of global and local allegiances against each other, as if they were bound to be in competition. This seems to me just the wrong way to think about things. After all, I am, like millions of people, a voting member of at least 3 political entities: New York City, New York State, and the United States. And if you ask me which of these I was more committed to, I'd have a hard time knowing what that meant. And I'd feel the same puzzlement if somebody asked if my metaphorical citizenship of the world, was added to the list of things that I also feel. Because citizenship is a kind of identity, its pull, like that of all identities, varies with the context and the issue. During mayoral elections, it matters most that I am a New Yorker. In senatorial elections, the city, the state, and the country all matter to me. And in presidential elections, I also find myself thinking as both a citizen of the United States and a citizen of the world. I want the President of the United States to make the United States a good nation among the nations. And for that purpose, I have to care as a global citizen about my vote as a citizen of the United States. So many of the gravest problems that face us, from climate change to global pandemics, simply don't respect political borders. But there is something else important in the cosmopolitan tradition, which developed perhaps more clearly in European cosmopolitanism in the late 18th century, and that is a recognition and celebration of the fact that our fellow world citizens, in their different places, with their different languages, cultures, and traditions, merit not just our moral concern, but also our interest and curiosity. Interactions with foreigners, precisely because they are different, can open us up to new possibilities, as we can open up new possibilities to them. In understanding the metaphor of global citizenship, both the concern for strangers and the curiosity about strangers, both of these things matter. Now, the stock modern slander against the cosmopolitan is that we are rootless. This accusation reflects, I think, not just moral blindness, but also intellectual confusion. What's distinctive about modern cosmopolitanism is its celebration of the contribution of every nation to the chorus of humankind. It's about sharing. And you cannot share if you have nothing to bring to the table. So cosmopolitans worthy of the name have rhizomes spreading horizontally, as well as taproots delving deep. We are anything but rootless. If nationalism and cosmopolitanism are, far from being incompatible, actually intertwined, how has cosmopolitanism become the capro espiatorio for those who seek to ally themselves with the spirit of nationalism? One reason is that some people have made excessive claims in the name of cosmopolitanism. They have been often seduced by the following tempting line of thought. If everybody matters, then they must all matter equally. And if that is true, then each of us has the same moral obligations to everyone. Partiality, favoring those to whom one is connected by blood or culture or territory, can look morally arbitrary. The real enemy of those who worry about citizens of nowhere is not a reasonable cosmopolitanism, but the different idea, occasionally espoused by people calling themselves citizens of the world, that it is wrong to be partial to your own place or people. What the impartial version of cosmopolitanism fails to understand is that the fact that everybody matters equally from the perspective of universal morality does not mean that each of us has the same obligations to everyone. I have, as you will be unsurprised to learn, a particular fondness for my own nephews and nieces, and it does not extend to your nephews and nieces. Indeed, I think it would be morally wrong not to favor my relatives when it comes to distributing my limited attention and treasure. Does it follow that I must hate your nephews and nieces or try to shape the world to their disadvantage? Of course not. I can recognize the legitimate moral interests of your family while still paying special attention to my family. It's not that my family matters than yours does, it's that it matters more to me. We generally have a stronger attachment to those with whom we grew up and with whom we make our lives than we do to those outside our families. Ahoho nsini kurumani. This proverb in my father's language says, a stranger is not more important than a fellow citizen. But we can still favor those with whom we share projects or identities, and it's a distinct feature of human psychology that we're capable of intense feelings around identities that are shared with millions or billions of strangers. Indeed, this characteristic is evident in the forms of nationalism that do not give rise to respect for other nations, but explode instead in hostility and xenophobia. That side of nationalism needs taming, and cosmopolitanism is one means of mastering it. But it's absurd to miss the other side of nationalism, its capacity to bring people together in projects such as creating a social welfare state or building a society of equals. Just as tribalism needs to be balanced by patriotism, nationalism needs the counterforces of cosmopolitanism. Local, national, global, we need identities at all these levels. We live with nearly 8 billion fellow humans on a small, warming planet. The cosmopolitan impulse that draws on our common humanity is no longer a luxury, it has become a necessity. And in summarizing it, that ancient ideal, the one that goes back to Diogenes, I want to return to some words with which I ended my book. They were written here in this city by a freed slave from Roman Africa, a Latin interpreter of Greek comedies, a writer from classical Europe who called himself the African. They are some of my favorite words. They were beloved too by Montaigne, one of my favorite writers, who grew up in a castle decorated in the style of a Roman villa in Périgord in France in the 16th century, and engraved these words on a beam in his study. They were written by Publius Terentius Appiah, Publius Terentius the African, more than 2,000 years ago. And they are homo sum, humani nihil a me alienum puto. I am human, I think nothing human alien to me. In a world full of the noisy claims of identities that divide us, it is sometimes worth remembering that there is this one identity that we all share. Thank you very much.